speakers this morning, but also Alan Carpenter. Perfect. And we'll welcome back Dennis as well from yesterday. Okay, the topic of the panel discussion this morning is the readiness of markets, of the market and consumer needs and awareness. Jerry will moderate. We've got, so we're running about 15 minutes behind time, so we'll run for the full half an hour if there are questions. We'll have a slightly shorter break for coffee.
Well, whereas I was talking about car sharing and telling that electrical cars are limited to urban areas, we had yesterday some demonstration that wireless charging might be in fact the new kind of range extender that we could consider for electromobility. And maybe it would be good to refresh our memories a little bit. But the question I have is, what is the timing perspective of spreading that new technology around us?
Yeah. So first I think it's worth saying that certainly from my point of view, the short-term goal is to maximise the use of electric vehicles in cities. And we do that via car clubs, car sharing schemes, those sorts of things. I think that's a low-hanging fruit. Where we resolve air quality situations, we introduce electrification in a way that mitigates the risk for owners, because we heard that consumers are very price sensitive, and this is an easy way to avoid that entirely by saying that they don't own the vehicle, somebody else owns the vehicles, who have the capital to manage it. The longer term ambition, I think, if we want to achieve significant levels of electric vehicle penetration, is to also allow them to travel on highways. And I don't just mean cars, I mean heavy vehicles, commercial vehicles, trucks and so on. That future, you know, the sort of the nice image I showed of a highway with a wireless link is a long-term future. We're talking about 15 to 20 years, perhaps. However, the technology exists now to begin to be able to do demonstrators to show the application. You know, for example, key routes between airports and cities. If you have car clubs in the city, or taxis in the city, most airports, as it happens, are actually just far enough outside of the city to make it viable to use an electric car, unless they're Teslas in Amsterdam and Schiphol. Because on that occasion it works, but again, I think that's a unique example. And so how do we facilitate penetration of vehicles in cities, as well as allowing them to do the things which provide potentially the most benefit, is to use this kind of concept. And this could be done, you know, 2 years from now. The technology exists now. It's a case of actually finding the capital and the willingness to demonstrate its functionality.
Very good. On the side of Kazik and Frost and Sullivan, we saw that there is a willingness from the consumer to open up to new technologies when it comes to the powertrain. But one important factor, and I think that the question was raised already, is the emotional tie that exists with the car. I'm sure His Excellency Mohammed bin Sulayem would not be ready to put 3 nice cars in a share program. But what should we do as authorities here in the Emirates to try to work on that emotional link? I'm not saying that it's only here that the emotional link exists, because it's worldwide that it exists, but it's probably one of the most sensitive time that we have to work on. Could you elaborate a little bit on this?
Absolutely. It's a very good point. I think that should answer a little bit of what Ian asked as well. We need to see where every region or every country is in the life cycle, or let me put it this way, where the consumer in every country is when you look at the life cycle of vehicle ownership. For example, in India, a vehicle purchase and ownership is still a very, very emotional thing, and it's a family decision. You know, in India, if you have to buy a vehicle, the entire family goes to the dealership. You know, the wife, the children, they want to touch and feel the vehicle. So it's a very, very strong emotional connection when they buy or purchase a vehicle. Whereas if you look at the European or the North American countries, that emotional connect is not there anymore. You know, cars are becoming more of a mode of commuting from point A to point B. So once we understand where every region or where every country is on that evolution cycle, we'll be able to propose relevant solutions. So we are now looking at, you know, car sharing, you know, ride sharing for more of the developed countries, whereas in countries which are still growing, which are still developing, the traditional ownership models will still have more importance than car sharing and ride sharing solutions. So it's just trying to understand where every country is in the evolution life cycle, and then proposing the appropriate solution to that particular region. I think that's going to be key.
Thank you. So, back to the UK. I don't know if you are familiar with what the London public transportation did over the last years. I think they have invested massively in the automation and in making an open access to all the data they register. Is that the way to go for public transportation, so that tomorrow more apps can be developed on their own data and make it even more attractive to users?
You'd have to forgive me, but it's about 5 years since I've been in the UK, having been here for the last 5 years, so I think it's okay. But yeah, it's this interconnectivity that a lot of people have talked about is absolutely critical. From an automotive industry perspective, locking in the car to part of a wider infrastructure of transport becomes increasingly important. Maybe in that sense, the UAE is still catching up with particularly the European markets, but you see a growing public transport infrastructure here. And from an automotive distribution point here in the UAE, linking our products into that is going to become more and more important as time goes by. And I think what we see here is very similar to what's been talked about in your surveys from Europe, from India, and from what other people have talked about. We're in that education phase. There is still a lack of understanding of alternative powertrains here in the UAE. So, from a Toyota point of view, we bring Prius to market in Q1 next year. We see two challenges. One is education. We know the technology works. We've piloted it for 5 years now with taxi companies. We've got over 50 million kilometers of real usage experience. We know the technology of a hybrid powertrain works in the UAE. In probably the toughest operating cycle you can imagine, taxi companies here run 24/7. 20,000 kilometers a month is not unusual. And we know the technology works. What we have to do is make the consumer understand that technology works. And then we get into the whole piece that's been talked about widely, which is about incentives. Because we're very clear, I think, that nowhere in the world has there been a significant uptake of alternative powertrains without incentive. But I think if we get the educational message across, if we get the support that is being talked about from government in terms of incentive, and then we are able to tap into a wider public transport infrastructure, I think there's a very good opportunity for alternative powertrains here in the UAE, despite a number of challenges that are widely talked about.
I think to add to what Alan said, I think a few OEMs today are also taking that step in terms of improving awareness. To give instant feedback to the consumer, let's say driving an electric vehicle or a hybrid, based on how they're driving. Like we've seen vehicles which have on the dashboard, let's say, a set of green lights, a set of red lights, orange lights that actually tell you how you've been driving, right, based on your driving behavior. Some of the OEMs also have an option that actually you can download your driving data onto a USB stick, go home and put it on your laptop and see how you've driven. And it's actually encouraging them to drive in a more responsible manner and help them, save more fuel and, contribute to the environment. So I think these kind of user interface options will go a long way in actually improving awareness about alternative fuel systems.
On Toyota, Toyota is known as the leader in hybrid cars. You launched Prius, as we did yesterday, already years ago. The fourth generation will be launched now in 2016. On the other hand, we hear about the Google car. I don't believe that Google ever will build a plant to start to produce massive numbers of cars, but Google can come inside of the car. The Apple car application exists as well. The automated car, is that something that Toyota believes is coming soon, or is it not a concern at all?
I think you've seen this for a number of years. There are increasing levels of automation in vehicles. If you talk about the evolution, perhaps, let's say, for example, of cruise control. Cruise control has been around for a long time. And then in more recent years, I guess the last 6-7 years, we've had adaptive cruise control systems. And now we've got auto brake systems. So you have an increasing level of automation in a vehicle. And logically, there's no reason why you couldn't ultimately get to complete automation. I don't think it would be a fool that said it was never going to happen. A lot of these things are about consumer acceptance, though. And I think the real core about this is, I don't think at the moment the vast majority of drivers are prepared to hand over complete and absolute control of their vehicle to a computer, however clever that computer is. So this is absolutely one where there's a huge educational curve. And I don't know, maybe my grandchildren will be happy to do that in due course. But I don't think I am, and I'm pretty sure my children aren't either. But who says it'll happen, I'm sure, at some point.
And I think it's also interesting, you mentioned Google Car, and of course we have one of the leading OEMs sitting here talking about what is automation from an OEM's perspective. I think we're on the brink of redefining what is a car. I think there is a traditional model of a car, and then there is the pod model, which people like Google are working on, there are many other manufacturers working on, which isn't a car as I would describe it. It's a method of personal public transportation, which can operate within city limits in a fully automated way. They don't have the same constraints and worries as a vehicle manufacturer because they don't have an existing user base to upset or please. They're completely new to the market. And we may see an emergence of such models. I mean, to give you an example of if anyone's recently flown to Heathrow Terminal 5 in London, there is the automated pods that take people from the business car park to the terminal. And they exist now and have done for a number of years. And they operate in a closed environment. But we're testing almost very similar pods in Greenwich, starting now in London, which will do very similar thing but in the public. There is another test like this happening in Milton Keynes as well. And these are beginning to emerge as probably the more risky implementations of fully automated driving, whilst vehicle manufacturers continue through the progression of the 5 steps, because there is I think they're approaching the automation question from different perspectives.
Yeah, I think there probably also is a lot of work to be done on the insurance side, the regulation side. I read an article recently that said, well, maybe the automated car is also the machine that can kill you if you are suddenly facing a situation where the car is confronted with a group of 5 pedestrians and needs to take a decision. I need to have less casualty as possible. and drive 90 degrees and crash you against the wall to kill you instead of the 5 pedestrian, I'm not sure I would buy such a car. So indeed, that's. I mean, are there any questions that you would like to address the panel? There is a question there in the rear.
I'd like to address the question to Mr. Carpenter, taking up on the consumer and the educational theme that Mr. Wilmark had made earlier. Given the complexity of the UAE as a market in comparison to, say, your consumers and your customers, to, say, what Mr. Wilmark would have in Belgium, it's much more complex in terms of the diversity of the market and the segmentation of the market. What do you see as the communications challenges, given the diversity of the UAE market, in terms of driving forward the information agenda that's been discussed here today?
That's an interesting question. We talk a lot about the complexity of the UAE market based on the fact there are, I've heard, anywhere between 170 and 200 nationalities resident here. So we talk a lot about it. Actually, I'm not as worried about it as that, to be honest. We've done some market research here. We've done a number of focus groups here. And actually, fundamentally, the results of those are not very different to what I've seen on the screen here in the last 2 days. Interestingly enough, given that we have pleasantly low fuel prices here in the UAE, fuel economy still scores very highly with people when we focus group this. The environmental benefits of their hybrid vehicle come quite a long way down the list, pretty much as we've seen here. So these are mixed social groups from different national demographics, and the results are not fundamentally different. So I'm not that concerned about it, to be honest. I don't see a particularly bigger challenge than I think has been seen anywhere else. And you touched on the Belgian piece, and I'll share with you an amusing little story about this. Toyota in Belgium ran a little social media exercise which they recorded for YouTube. And if you Google it, I'm sure you can find it on YouTube. And they set up, I believe it was Antwerp main railway station, they set up a Toyota Prius, not the plug-in version, in the middle of the station, and they offered an incentive to passers-by to find out where this car plugged in. Now, of course, it doesn't plug in. There is no, but they gave people a lead and said, if you can find out where to plug this in, we'll give you a prize or whatever. And they filmed this, and it's on YouTube, and it's quite entertaining. But even in a country which you would imagine is very advanced in this, and I don't think anybody would dispute that, the number of people that they managed to persuade to spend 5 or 10 minutes of their valuable time crawling around the floor of a railway station and opening the boot and opening the doors, trying to plug this in, was very entertaining. So I'm not sure fundamentally that it's very different. We think about Europe perhaps as the centre of a lot of this thinking around, environmentally friendly vehicles. I'm not sure it's that different, to be honest.
A little gimmick we are starting to distribute in Europe among the automobile clubs is a little dongle that you can plug in the EUBD plug of the cars. Each car sold in Europe needs to have a standard socket so that you can connect it to a computer and read the parameters of the car. And out of that dangle, we use the data that flows through the canvas of the car in terms of consumption and driving attitude. And you can download an app of the automobile club on your smartphone, and when you come back at the end of your journey, you have all the metering about how you have been driving, how many fuel you have been saving, and things like that. That's interesting if you already are engaged yourself. But the trick is that we put that on a community level, and we start to organize a contest, and we will draw who is the best driver of the month, so that we can promote the person and congratulate it because he has won something, because he has saved the most. That's another way of educating people can make a little gimmick about a game, you know, on fuel economy and using the current technology, because we just use the data that you provide.
I think another point to add to what, this was not a gimmick of course, but actually one of our surveys we actually asked consumers, what do you think is the most harmful emission gas? We actually listed NOx, hydrocarbons, carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide. 70% of the people said they think carbon dioxide is the most harmful gas.
It's not harmful.
Right, exactly. But if you look at the automotive perspective, it's NOx, it's hydrocarbons, so it's diesel particulate matter that's more harmful, but that's not what people think, right? So, and the people which thought carbon dioxide was the most harmful thing for people or consumers from Germany. You would think German consumers are more aware in terms of automotive technology, but they fared the worst. So,
I think at one level it's not surprising. There's been such a huge focus on carbon dioxide connected to global warming for so many years, and you know, this is ultimately what's driven this swing to diesel in the European market, because recent issues aside, it's clear that the move to diesel has reduced carbon dioxide emissions across the EU, no doubt about it. But what's only become more apparent recently is the side effects of that, which are the increase in nitrous oxides and particulates and the impact that those have on human health. So I think it depends which way you phrase that question. You know, what's more harmful? You know, are we talking about harming human health, or are we talking about creating global warming?
And it's worth pointing out as well that there has been, I think misinformation may be too strong of a word, but it hasn't been in the car's industry's best interest, certainly in Europe, to talk up the issue of NOx and PM, because actually they were trying to encourage diesel sales and manufacture. And very successfully. I mean, certainly from most European countries in the UK, we got to the point where almost 50% of car sales were diesel. And now the policy had to be entirely reversed to the point where now we're actually trying to disencourage the purchasing of diesel vehicles. And I think that's a trend that we're going to see across Europe as a whole. And of course, following the Volkswagen scandal, we're probably going to see many more people being much more aware of NOx and PM. And it's a question of what is it that we tell consumers and people, and how do we portray that information. And that changes depending on what the policy objectives are.
Do we still have time for maybe another question? One more question? Yes, we have one.
Yes, I'm talking about the Gulf region. That's I think more than 90% of the electricity generated here is from fossil fuel, okay, like natural gas, heavy oil, and diesel used to generate the electricity. So we have a kilowatt generated from fossil fuel, okay? So if I use this kilowatt in the electric vehicles, I think that's what's the effect on the air quality. So whether this kilowatt is generated from a fossil fuel. This is my first question. My second question is about the electric vehicle, okay? That's what's the effect of the fuel prices, okay, and the electric vehicle development. You know that now the market, the prices going down, the gasoline and the diesel and the oil is going down, and what this effect on the development of the electric vehicle. Thanks.
I can take the second question. Sorry, first I'll take the second question. You're probably talking about the switching behavior, right? So you're right, you know, the preference towards electric or hybrid vehicles is very much dependent on where the fuel prices are today. So in fact, you will see a lot of studies that the switch towards alternative fuel vehicles, hybrids or electrics, will happen when the price of conventional fuel, diesel or petrol, reaches a threshold or goes beyond a set threshold. So it is dependent on where fuel prices are, but the consideration on why a consumer purchases a diesel, a hybrid or an electric vehicle remains unchanged. But the switching behavior between choosing a diesel and choosing an electric vehicle is actually dependent on the fuel price in that particular country. So it is in the interest of that region or the country to regulate fuel prices if you want to promote a certain type of powertrain.
Just to add to that, in the 48 hours or so after fuel prices were deregulated here a few months ago, the number of telephone calls we fielded from customers saying, what have you got that's got a diesel engine in it? Because we'd had this massive drop in diesel price overnight. And it bears that out exactly. The phones were, pretty much ringing off the hook for a couple of days with people asking that question. So I think it's very clear that fuel price is a major driver in this.
But in Europe, we need to moderate that because, as I said, you have up to 80% of taxes on the fuel. So the raw material represents only a maximum 20% of the price we pay. So if it goes down by 50%, it's only a reduction of 10%. Plus, many governments have included a new law that says that when the price of oil are going down, they take 50% of that reduction to increase taxes again, so that they are softening the decrease in price that is happening.
And it's based on the evidence that we've seen from vehicle purchasing around Europe, is fuel prices at their lowest in 5 years, I think, and the vehicle take-up is higher than it's ever. So, of course, what we're talking about here is price elasticity, which we have never been in a situation before where we've had an alternative to internal combustion engine. So nobody really knows what is the elasticity of buying decisions on fuel based on fuel price to a new technology, because there was no precedent. However, the evidence that exists today shows that even though the prices are going down for petrol and diesel, people continue to buy more and more plug-in vehicles as the time goes on. And also, picking up on your first question, it's important to differentiate between CO2 emissions and air quality and air pollution. If you're talking about a generation of electricity, generally speaking, those power plants or generation plants tend to be not in urban areas. So yes, they do produce air pollutants in substantial quantities, potentially much higher than diesel engines themselves, but there are no or very low amount of people that are exposed to it in that area. So it doesn't tend to be an issue. With CO2, of course, it is an issue. And if you are mostly producing that 1 kilowatt hour of energy from coal, then it has a very high CO2 footprint, potentially much higher than the most efficient petrol or diesel engines. But in terms of air quality, then actually it's not an issue as long as you're moving the problem into an area where there isn't a population to be affected.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we had some excellent questions from the panel and an excellent discussion. So thank you very much, everybody.